Thanks very much to Steph and to Gerald Rector from Vic Health, to everybody representing sport, but in particular women's football in Australia. And what a night last night. Starting off with a Sam Kerr header, Tamika Butt deflection and a looping ball over the goalkeeper, and then the Sam Kerr strike from outside of the box, which is currently being tracked down. I'm told it's passing Uluru as we speak. It's on its way to the border. Peter Dutton has alerted Indonesia not to be surprised by a missile that passes over their territory, and it's due to touch down in Europe sometime about 9 p.m. tomorrow night. So the Matildas now are arguably one of the two most exciting teams in Australian sport. As a Richmond Football Club supporter, I have to name Richmond. They, as of this morning, on the FIFA website, they're ranked number 6. I think December 15, the next set of rankings come out, and if all goes well on Sunday in Geelong versus China, we're very hopeful that they will rise significantly further. And there's not a lot of numbers between 6 and 1. They won't get all the way to 1, but they might be able to make very significant further progress. To be 6th in the world with over 118 teams ranked is incredible, but the fact that they have the prospect of rising significantly further is an absolute testimony to the strength of Australian football, but in particular the strength of Australian women's football. And we have arguably the most exciting player in the world in Sam Kerr. To have Michelle back on the pitch is just a thrill for the country. And the women's game in Australia is incredible. It's been a great week. The Honduras match means that we are right at the top, both in women's football and men's football. And I think everybody associated with football in Australia should be immensely proud of what they've done. But today's actually about the women's game, not the men's game. And it's about women's participation in sport. So I want to speak briefly about 3 main topics. 1 is about women in sport in Australia. 2 is the National Sports Plan, and in particular the elements about women's participation. And 3 is about the Women's World Cup and where we're heading there. In terms of women in sport, you think of some of the iconic names, and I was fortunate and privileged to be at the naming of the new members of the Australian Sports Hall of Fame, and the newest legend, of course, the great Raelene Boyle very recently. And to look around the images of the legends of Australian sport, to see Dawn Fraser and Betty Cuthbert, Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley, Shane Gould, so many others, is to see people who've had an iconic role as leaders, as role models, to see Cathy Freeman there and everything that she has represented for Australian sport. Shane Gould, and to bid a very sad farewell to Betty Cuthbert on that night, was to see not just Australian women, not just Australian sport, but to see a huge part of the Australian story, how we identify as a country. So you cannot, and no one here would, underestimate the role of sports leaders, of sport, but in particular of women in sport, in saying to young girls around the country, you can be everything you choose to be. And this is one of the ways, but it says that the gender equality is absolute in its best sense. Now, there's more to do, but that history is immensely important. But the shift in the last 12 months is a very interesting one. All of those names that I mentioned are, of course, individual athletes, incredible global achievers. But what has happened in the last 12 months is that the women's team sports have started to assume that same prominence. We have AFLW, which has just taken off. And I spoke with Gil McLaughlin, and he said, they had the best problem they could ever have when the first match of the season was held at Princes Park and they had a lockout. And it wasn't because of the unruly behaviour of some of the fans. It was because of the fact that they just underestimated the sheer pulling power and attraction of the event. He said it was the best problem he will ever have as a sports leader. AFLW, we have the Sevens that won the Olympic gold. We can see what's happening. Only yesterday, the Prime Minister hosted a breakfast for the Ashes winning Australian women's team. And to have people such as Beth Mooney and Alyssa Healy and Elise Perry there, who are now becoming household names. And the standard of the sport that was played at Manuka Oval on Tuesday night was incredible. But at the peak of all of these, in terms of women's team sport now, and I don't think this is in any way disrespectful, but it's just a reality, is the fact that we have the Matildas. And the Matildas are there as really a beachhead of Australian women in a team sport at a global level, and attracting participants, attracting spectators, and attracting viewers. And that is, I think, an absolute breakthrough. So that threshold has been crossed where women's sport has become a major television attraction outside of tennis and golf. So that's just a critical moment in Australian sports history, in my view, and we are living through it right now. And the people in this room who have helped drive forward women's football in Australia have an enormous amount to be thanked for. So I wanted to acknowledge that today and to say thank you to everybody involved in driving the game forward. So that's where we're at in terms of what we're doing with that overview of the role of women's sport. But now I want to turn to the National Sports Plan and what we're doing to encourage female participation from the 6 and 7 year olds through to the 60 and 70 year olds. There are really 4 themes to the National Sports Plan. 1 is participation, 2 is performance or elite sports outcome, 3 is prevention in terms of what we're doing with preventive health, and 4 is integrity of the game and of sports. In terms of participation, the first thing here is we're trying to bring, of course, as many young girls and young women into sport as possible. And we do that for the society of it, for the mental health benefits, for the physical health benefits, and as a lead into the elite performance at later stages. As somebody said to me, the more milk in the bucket, the more cream at the top. But at the end of the day, for culture, for society, for sport, for health, for everything that comes with it, the more young girls and young women we can get in, that's just a better country. It's a better country if we can do that. So the first thing there is where we have a $16 million Girls Make Your Move program, and that's $8 million a year. We've already done 2 years. We've got a 3rd year scheduled, and frankly, my expectation is that we'll continue this on an indefinite and virtually permanent basis. And that's working through the different communities to bring these young girls and women into sport, to give them that sense of possibility, and to we've had an extraordinary amount of engagement with at secondary school level, an 80% recognition amongst young women of the program. We've been using Facebook and social media and driving it through the very channels that they most interact with. It has been designed again, Seth, by many of the people in this room. And it's been more successful than we'd hoped, and I'm delighted that Victoria is paralleling and working in tandem with that. The second of the programs has been the Women in Sport Leadership Program, and we've had over 80 participants in that, and we're boosting the number of leaders in that program. And then the third is the Stepping In program, which is about, at senior levels, building the leadership of women in sport so as they can bring others through. We've had 18 participants, 14 different sports, and these are, again, the leaders and the drivers of sports participation in the future. And along the way, we've been working with all of the codes on female facilities, because frankly, one of the barriers has been that you have grungy change rooms, and no young woman or girl in their right mind would want to go near some of the change rooms that I have on the Mornington Peninsula. And so we've been investing through the through some of our local programs at the federal level. The states are doing a great job and the codes are doing a great job, and we're trying to work in a coordinated fashion on transitioning those change rooms. The next thing then is the elite games and what we're doing in terms of performance. Now, we have to start as role models at the top, and so we were selecting the best people for the Australian Sports Commission. Fortunately, we were able to recruit Kate Palmer. Many of you would know Kate from her incredible role as being perhaps the biggest driver of participation in netball, and she's now the CEO. We've appointed her this year as the CEO of the Australian Sports Commission, and Kate and I worked on the membership of the Sports Commission panel, and only last week, only a few weeks ago, we were able to announce the newest members of the Australian Sports Commission board, including Gabrielle Traynor and Andrea Mitchell, and that took the Australian Sports Commission board for the first time in Australian history to over 50% female participation. So as Kate said to me, she looked at me and said, "Women rule." And when Kate says that, you sort of nod and say, "Yes, you know, she's a formidable presence. She's fantastic." So to have a majority of female leadership on the board, not for any reasons other than we were looking around at the best people, and then we worked out, oh, that's interesting. We have, not intentionally, but simply by selecting the best people, been able to ensure that there is, for the first time in the paramount peak body, a majority of women's leadership, as well as the CEO, as well as Alyssa Camplin playing her role along with John Wiley. Just great. Equally though, in terms of our senior sports organisations, we've gone over the last 3 years from 27% to 39% women's board membership. More to go. And in some sports, and this is the beauty of it, there'll be more than 50%. In some, there'll be less. Always, though, we want to make sure there's at least 40%. So those programs are really coming through. And at the elite level, we have the leadership. Now, equally, across all of the different sports, we want to be encouraging the capacity for women to have professional careers, to be supported. And so we're going through the redesign of the AIS. We want to work much more with the universities to ensure that there's an engagement. I think Australian sport has underdone the engagement between our national sporting organisations, our AIS and the universities. And we're working with the University of Canberra, Victorian University, and increasingly around the states. We'll be building that in. I think there are many different things from around the world we can look at. One of them is the way the Americans draw and use their universities to engage with their sports and to give their people a real home. And if we can build the AIS so as it's at the centre, but then it has around the donut the University of Canberra, Victoria University, and the engagement of all of those sports personnel, then we will have real pathways for women into sports elite performance, but also into sports careers. And I think that that's a very critical part. The next thing, of course, is the preventive side of sport and health. And of course, this is dealing with obesity. You know, we're the 6th longest living country in the world, but we have the 6th highest level of obesity in the OECD. That means that we have to get sports participation linked with prevention in young people right through to older people. So one of the things we're doing is launching a Prime Minister's Walk for Life and that's a $10 million program. But what it's aimed at in particular is those that might be in cultural groups that are not naturally inclined to sport, just to get them out walking. Those that are at an older age, and this is particularly a challenge for women and for young girls. So to lift those sports participation rates and to lift the preventive benefits of gentle exercise and then moving them where it's appropriate into more active exercise. Whether it's cardio, whether it's oncology, whether it's diabetes in particular, all of these benefit from active participation in sport. So we're trying to do that. Then the next of the areas is in terms of integrity. Now look, the Australian sports world by global standards, it has some of the highest integrity standards. I'm not a pessimist, but I'm realistic to the fact that with sports betting, we have huge challenges where you have unregistered overseas players in the sports betting world who will try to penetrate Australian sport. I met with Justice James Wood, who's doing the integrity review. His view, preliminary view, is that the integrity of elite Australian sport is as good as any in the world, which is great news. The risk is at the sub-elite level, where you will find extraordinary betting on individual sports which may not be remotely prominent. And so you will have bookies from overseas who are trying to infiltrate the game. So that's our next task. And that's a challenge for all of the sports. And that's why we're likely to head down the path of a National Sports Integrity Commission, more as a preventive measure, in the same way that we have X-rays at airports, to prevent against the attempted infiltration, which has occurred in other countries and which is being tested now within Australia. But the starting point is we're in a very good place. The realistic point is there will always be the challenges along the way. So that's why we're looking at an Integrity Commission as a step. So then this ultimately brings me to the future of women's football in Australia. And we know that we've got just over 6% of young girls at school playing football, over 130,000 participants. And it's a very exciting sport. I think after last night, that number will continue to climb, and as we go forward to 2019, it will continue to climb again and again and again. So that's great for the game. But the prize that we really want to work towards is the 2023 World Cup. We've committed and contributed to that $1 million, and there's a further $4 million that's currently being assessed. I think the best advertisement for Australia is the Matildas. That gives us a realistic prospect, and we've looked at it very carefully. We've looked at FIFA, and we know that there was corruption around earlier bidding processes. I think it's it's important that we're honest about that. We also know that it's been significantly cleaned up, and we're confident that the processes have high integrity, but we're on constant alert. This group can help us look for any challenges in that. But I spoke with the PM yesterday, with Michaela Cash, the Minister for Women, with the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, and we're very predisposed towards the next stage of the bid. We want to work with the state federations to make sure that there's full alignment between the state federations and the FFA. Without that, it would be almost impossible to bid. I do want to say without that, if FIFA were in administration of Australian sport, then we would not be successful. We know that. They've made it clear to us, so therefore we've got to resolve that within the next week. But I am very confident we'll get the domestic resolution. I'm very confident then we'll be in a position to provide a next round of support. There's another $4 million that we have contingent to the resolution in Australia. And then I am increasingly confident that with the product of this precinct of Australian sport, we will have a real shot at winning the 2023 bid. And what a moment that would be. Everybody would be talking about it. We would have the world's biggest women-only sports event, and I would say we'd be looking at going back-to-back 2019 and 2023. On that hopeful note, I want to thank you, I want to honour you, and I want to say roll on Sunday and then roll on December 15 and the next FIFA Women's Rankings. Thank you very much.